there. Let's welcome in R. Sri Shankar, Head Institutional Equities at Prabhudas Lilladher. He looks at the banking, NBFC space very closely. Sri, what do you make of numbers of M&M Finance, LIC Housing Finance, Indiabulls Housing Finance? What is the sense that you get looking at these NBFC numbers?
See, both MMFS and LIC Housing Finance is a part of our active coverage. The performance has been better. And I think there is clearly from our point of view, we have revised our earnings estimates for, our target price for MMFS from 325 to 375. And we have moved our forward earnings to FY19 March. So we are also expecting with better growth, or rather higher growth than what we had anticipated in terms of a loan growth, etc. I think things look much better for MMFS from much more from a long-term perspective. So we like it. LIC Housing Finance also, clearly the asset quality issues not being there, because housing is something where we don't expect significant amount of problems to happen right now, especially where loan-to-values are much comfortable, like in these kind of cases. So I think both were better results, and the kind of growth even Indiabulls Housing Finance, again, it's not a part of our active coverage, has been pretty strong. So I would say that two housing finance companies, one NBFC, relatively better off.
Right, but overall, just looking at housing finance companies, the trend continues. There is no slowdown of growth, no impact of demonetization at all, which is seen in these names.
See, we can't say that there is no impact. What has happened is, obviously, when demonetization happened, we had lowered the expectations of growth from around 18% to 14%, etc. in many cases. So probably it's not 14, it's at 15%. Let's put it that way. So what we had anticipated, the slowdown will have an impact on the growth. It has been doing better than that. That's the way I will put it across.
Right. In terms of housing finance, we spoke to Indiabulls, we spoke to LIC post their results. They are quite upbeat about the new affordable housing scheme which has come. Do you think that can be a big driver for growth, especially for some of the housing finance companies which caters in the tier 2, tier 3 market?
Definitely, yes. That will invariably form a part of the growth. Forget the affordable housing part of it. In a country like India, where the number of dwellings needed, even in that particular space, affordable housing finance space also is quite huge. But it's a different issue that in metros, how many affordable housing units can actually be constructed. So you probably will have to move into far suburbs from the metros, or into, as you put it, across in tier 2, tier 3 cities, etc. So now obviously that demand is there to grow, and we do believe that that growth will continue to be there.
Right. In terms of Axis Bank, which declares numbers today, what will be your call? What sort of expectation do you have? And looking at the results of Yes Bank, IndusInd, HDFC, one cannot extrapolate as to how the numbers for Axis will be.
See, we have a reduce on that bank because we believe that while the asset qualities, when you look at the stressed assets, at what level we are, or probably for us, stressed assets is what we call it as restructured plus SMA2 plus NPAs. And that then these restructured assets look at what levels are the provision. Our expectations is that for a bank like Axis Bank, the credit cost will continue to remain high. Once that credit cost, once is recognition of a lot of these NPAs, provisioning gets done, then it could be business as usual. Axis Bank, in our expectations, will have a pre-provisioning operating profit of closer to 17,000 crores. And that 17,000 crores, is something, even if they have to provide for 17,000 crores, they earn that much of profit. So it's not from a long-term perspective a negative, but from a short-term perspective, till the time the provisioning gets taken care, we still have a reduce on the stock as at this moment.
Right. In terms of Axis Bank, it will be an important number to see the trend. So at least it will tell you, what banks like ICICI or some of the other PSUs are doing. May not all of them, but at least it's from the different pack than what has been reported so far.
See, let's put it up this way, Pankaj. All these banks have got certain level of stressed assets. The definition of they call it as stress is different. So from our perspective as an analyst, we have been looking at stressed assets as assets where it has got restructured plus your NPAs plus your SMA2. SMA2 is where your payments have not come from and is overdue from 61 to 90 days. Anything beyond 90 is an NPA. Assuming that there is no overlap between restructured and these SMA2 accounts. So we have seen certain estimates of how much of these trust assets will slip in. So for both ICICI and Axis, our expectations that slippages will be slightly more, and that's the reason why we are cautious on these two, while we have been optimistic on HDFC, IndusInd, etc., and Kotak on the private sector space to the much on the higher side. So that call still remains, and that's the reason why I'm reiterating that I expect to see higher credit costs for Axis Bank. And once we see that higher credit cost gets accounted, or rather it's already provided, then from the conference call, then we can take comfort from where they are. That's a different call after the what we need to make it after the conference call, whether all the poison is purged from the system. That's what we want to see right now.
Right. You look at the strategy as well, you look at the banking space as well. Now, most of the strategists that we have been speaking to say that banking will lead the growth, banking and NBFC in terms of Nifty numbers, in terms of the large cap numbers. Do you believe that can happen? Can banks continue to grow at 20% YOY, at least the large ones which are a part of Nifty?
See, Pankaj, there are three points to that question that you asked. If I may say, I'll put it up with three answers to the question. First, can the banks grow at 20%? Now, 20% is a number that you say. Look at what has happened. Your system has grown at around 4 to 5%. 5%. That's the industry credit growth for the year ended March. Within that, or before the demonetization, up to September, the system growth was closer to 10-11%. So which means that once the demonetization happened, your growth actually slowed down quite considerably. That's the first part. Second part is within this 5% growth in the system, you look at what HDFC Bank grew. That's around 19.6% or something like that. And then you had IndusInd and Yes Bank growing at closer to 30%. 30% and 130%, above 35% or so. So here the growth rate starts to differ. Now, when I again look at something like a HDFC Bank, today it has got a 5,45,000 crores of assets, credit. So you grew at 20%, that means you probably would have grown at closer to 80,000 crores. 80,000 crores is the size of one smaller bank. That's a huge number. So at the same time, your PSU banks, many of them have degrown. So don't look at that absolute number per se. All these PSU private sector banks would have gained market share, big gaining of market share. And I would also suspect that Axis and ICICI Bank, because of that particular problems that they would have been growing faster earlier, that growth also would have slowed down. So you'll see other things. And you look at many of these private sector banks, if the industry growth is around 11-12%, then their growth could be significantly higher. If the industry growth has come down to 5%, a 20% growth is fairly good. And that's also a period when inflation levels are low. So it doesn't get added to working capital growth to a great extent. And commodity prices are not very high. That also remains subdued. So to me, some of these private sector banks, they will grow at a faster pace. And if the industry is growing at 5%, it could be now the 20% plus kind of a growth. If it's growing at around 10-11%, it could be probably in the level of 20-25% or so for the larger banks, and others could be at those kind of pace. That's the second part of the answer. So and the third part is, yes, will the banking and NBFC space will lead the growth for the economic recovery? For sure. They will continue to lead that growth also.
Right. How do you view a stock like Wipro? It came out with its earnings and the management's guidance is very muted. In fact, if you look at the organic growth, it will be perhaps a degrowth coming in the June quarter. first for the large IT companies since the financial meltdown. So what do you do with IT stocks? The valuations look better, but the expectation is only of single-digit growth coming in. Is this a avoid the entire sector? What about Wipro? Are there any picks that you have in the IT space?
See, specifically for Wipro, I would urge you to even have a look at our sector theme report that we made on IT, on the valuations and the differential between the Indian companies versus the multinational companies by our analyst Madhu Babu. He had reported a report almost just before the result season started. So it explains the conundrum Wipro also has. Wipro has not delivered for quite long, and it has a 20% negative return over the last 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, the numbers. And from a valuation perspective, it still continues to remain one of the cheapest stories because it has got so much of cash, and a buyback will probably push that stock up in the near term. But from a long-term growth story, I don't think that there is much to offer for it in terms of a growth or growth strategies to etc. within Wipro. It's not one of our preferred stocks in the IT space for sure.
So what are your preferred stocks in the IT space? What would you look to pick?
It still continues to be Infosys on that side. Then you look at Hexaware. We like Infosys and Hexaware among the IT stories to a great extent.
All right. Today we're seeing a move coming in for ITC also. It's a heavyweight and has moved up about 2%. What do you expect by way of earnings for ITC? Do you think some of the other businesses like food or hotels will start kicking in for them, or will the worries about cigarette volume still continue to be a concern?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you properly.
My view, I wanted to check what is your view on ITC.
ITC, we expect nothing spectacular kind of any performance. It should be a steady performer at there.
All right. Thank you so much, Sri Shankar, for speaking with us at NDTV Profit, sparing your time and discussing all the stocks that we have. A pleasure having you with us on NDTV Profit.